The winter wind carried whispers of damnation through the Carpathian passes, and Brother Matthias pulled his woolen cloak tighter against the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. 3 weeks of travel from Vienna had brought him to this forsaken corner of Transylvania, where the maps grew vague, and the crosses at crossroads leaned like drunkards against the weight of accumulated snow. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Courage, picked its way carefully along the frozen road. The beast had earned its name a dozen times over in Matthias's service, never balking at the scent of corruption or the presence of unholy things. Yet even Courage seemed uneasy now, ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring at something the Inquisitor could not yet perceive. The village of Valeni appeared as the sun began its descent behind the mountain peaks, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. It was larger than Matthias had expected. Perhaps 200 souls, clustered around a modest stone church with a bell tower that thrust defiantly toward the darkening sky. Smoke rose from chimneys, and he could hear the distant sound of a hammer against an anvil, the everyday rhythms of life continuing despite the supernatural threat that had drawn him here. The reports had been dire. A creature of the night, they said. Children gone missing. Livestock drained of blood. The mark of the devil upon the land. The bishop himself had selected Matthias for this mission, knowing his reputation as a man of unwavering faith and proven competence in matters of the occult. 17 confirmed destructions of unholy creatures. 17 times he had brought the light of God to places where darkness had taken root. He had expected to find a village in the grip of terror. Instead, he found something far more unsettling: normalcy. The blacksmith who directed him to the inn showed no fear, only a weary hospitality. The innkeeper, a broad woman with flour still dusting her apron, welcomed him with genuine warmth and showed him to a clean room with a good fire already burning. The bread she brought him was fresh, the ale was strong, and when he inquired, carefully, obliquely, about troubles in the region, she merely shrugged. Troubles? No more than anywhere else, brother. The winter has been hard, but we manage. The Lord provides. Matthias studied her weathered face for signs of deception, but found none. Either she was an accomplished liar, or something was very wrong with the intelligence he had been given. That night, he spread his tools upon the rough wooden table in his room, a silver crucifix, blessed by the Pope himself, vials of holy water from 3 sacred springs, a stake of ash wood, cut under a new moon and sanctified with the proper rites, a copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, its pages worn from use, and his pistol, loaded with bullets he had cast himself, each one etched with prayers and dipped in holy oil. He prayed for hours, kneeling on the hard floor until his knees ached, asking for guidance and the strength to do what must be done. But when he finally rose and looked out the window at the sleeping village, doubt gnawed at him like a rat in the walls. The next morning brought a surprise. The village priest, Father André, was not the elderly scholar Matthias had expected, but a young man, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and the build of someone who had known hard labor before taking orders. He greeted Matthias in the church with appropriate deference, but also with a certain wariness. "The bishop sent word of your coming," Father André said, his Latin precise and unaccented. "Though I confess I am uncertain why. We have had no troubles here that require the attention of the Holy Inquisition." "I was told otherwise," Matthias replied, watching the younger priest carefully. "Reports of a vampire. Deaths. Children vanishing in the night." Father André's expression shifted, not to fear, but to something more complex. Anger, perhaps, or frustration. There have been no deaths, Brother Matthias, and the only child who went missing was the miller's son, who ran away to Brasov to become a clerk. We received a letter from him just last month. Then the reports were false? Not false, perhaps, but certainly exaggerated. The priest gestured toward the altar. Walk with me. There are things you should understand about Valeni before you proceed with your investigation. They walked through the village as the morning unfolded around them. Matthias observed everything with the trained eye of an investigator. The children playing in the snow showed no signs of fear or malnutrition. The adults went about their work with the steady rhythm of people who felt secure in their homes. The livestock in the pens were healthy, their coats glossy, their eyes bright. 6 years ago, Father Andrei began, this village was dying. A plague had taken half our number. The harvest had failed 2 years running. The boyar who owned these lands had raised the taxes to a point where people were starving. We were, all of us, on the brink of despair. And then she came. Matthias stopped walking. The vampire. That is what she is, yes, but that is not all she is. Father Andrei met his gaze steadily. She saved us, Brother Matthias, and she continues to save us still. It was heresy of the most blatant sort, and Matthias felt his hand drift toward the crucifix beneath his cassock. You admit to harboring a creature of Satan? To allowing an unholy thing to live among Christian people? I admit to having eyes that see and a heart that knows mercy when it encounters it. The young priest's voice was firm. Judge me if you must, condemn me if you will. But before you raise your hand against her, you should at least meet her. See with your own eyes what manner of creature she truly is. Vampires cannot walk in daylight. Then come tonight, if you dare. The challenge was subtle, but Matthias heard it clearly. His pride bristled, but he forced himself to consider carefully. If the priest was corrupted, if the entire village had fallen under some dark enchantment, then rushing forward without understanding the full scope of the threat would be foolish. He was one man, however well armed. Patience and reconnaissance were as much tools of the Inquisition as stakes and holy water. Very well, he said. Tonight. The day passed slowly. Matthias walked the perimeter of the village, noting its defences, or lack thereof. No garlic hung above doorways, no wild roses grew in careful tangles at the thresholds. The windows bore no protective symbols. Either the people here were fools, or they felt no need for protection. He spoke with the villagers, carefully probing for signs of enchantment or coercion. But their testimonies were consistent. Yes, they knew about the mistress of the old manor. Yes, they understood her nature. No, they did not fear her. She had healed their sick. She had given them seeds when they had none. She had stood between them and the boyar's soldiers when the taxes came due. She's an angel, that one, said an old woman as she worked her spinning wheel. Dark angel, maybe, but an angel all the same. God works in mysterious ways, brother. Who are we to question his instruments? It was precisely this sort of theological confusion that allowed evil to flourish, Matthias knew. And yet he could not deny the evidence before him. These people were not terrified cattle awaiting slaughter. They were not the hollow-eyed victims of demonic thrall. They were simply people living their lives, grateful for an unexpected salvation. As night fell, Father Andrei came to collect him. They walked in silence through the snow, taking a path that led away from the village proper toward the dark mass of the old manor that crowned the hill overlooking Valeni. It had been a nobleman's house once, that much was clear. But time and neglect had softened its edges, and ivy had claimed whole sections of the stone walls. The door was not locked. It swung open at Father Andre's touch, revealing an entrance hall lit by candles that cast dancing shadows across walls lined with old books and strange artifacts. Matthias's hand tightened on the crucifix in his pocket, but he forced himself to project calm confidence. "Welcome, Inquisitor." The voice came from the shadows at the top of the stairs, and despite his years of training, Matthias felt his breath catch. She descended like moonlight given form, her movements possessed of an inhuman grace that nevertheless seemed entirely natural. She was tall, taller than Matthias himself, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that caught the candlelight and reflected it back like a cat's. She wore a simple dress of deep burgundy, modest by the standards of the nobility but rich in material and cut. No jewelry adorned her throat or hands, but she needed no ornamentation. Her beauty was the sort that belonged in old paintings and older legends. But it was her eyes that held him. They were dark, nearly black, but there was something in them that spoke of depths beyond his comprehension. Sorrow, perhaps, or weariness, the weight of years beyond counting. "I am Elena Draculeschi," she said, her voice carrying the accent of old Wallachia, the words shaped by a tongue that had learned Latin from Romans, not from priests. "And you are Brother Matthias, come to destroy me. If you know my purpose, why allow me to enter?" He was pleased that his voice remained steady. "Why not flee, or strike first?" A small smile touched her lips, sad and knowing. "Where would I flee to? I have run enough in my long existence. And as for striking first, I do not kill without cause, Brother Matthias. I have not fed on human blood in over 300 years. I will not break that vow now, even to preserve my own existence." 300 years? He heard the skepticism in his own voice. Vampires are spawn of the devil, created through dark ritual and darker pacts. They are not creatures of such age. "Your church has theories," Elena said, and now he heard amusement mixing with the sadness. "But theories are not always truth. I was not created by ritual, Inquisitor. I was born this way, as my mother was before me, and her mother before her, back into the mists of time before Rome fell, before Christ walked the earth. We are old, my bloodline, older than your faith, and we are not what your books claim us to be." It was blasphemy, of course, but it was blasphemy delivered with such calm certainty that Matthias found himself uncertain how to respond. Father Andre had taken a position by the door, neither blocking escape nor offering aid. This, Matthias realized, was a test. But of what? His faith? His wisdom? His capacity for mercy? "Show me," he said finally. "If you are not what I believe you to be, then show me. Prove that you are not a threat to these people." Very well. What followed was an education that shook the foundations of everything Matthias thought he knew. Elena walked him through the manor, showing him room after room that had been converted to purposes far removed from the luxurious decay of forgotten nobility. Here was a library of medical texts, some so old they were nearly crumbling, others new enough that the ink still smelled fresh. Here was a laboratory where herbs dried and distillations bubbled over careful flames. Here was a workshop where she compounded medicines and prepared remedies. "The plague that struck 6 years ago," she explained as they walked, "was not divine punishment. It was disease, carried by fleas on rats that came on the Boyer's grain shipments. I recognized it. I had seen it before, in Constantinople, in the time of Justinian. I knew how to treat it. Boiled water, clean bandages, certain herbs to reduce fever and ease pain. Simple things, but beyond the knowledge of the village. You could not cure them all, Matthias said, remembering Father Andre's words. Half the village had died. No. The single word carried centuries of grief. I have never been able to cure them all, but I saved who I could, and when the harvest failed, I gave them seed grain from my own stores, laid by over decades against just such a need. And when the boyar's men came to extract taxes that would have left them to starve through winter, I persuaded the collectors to be more reasonable in their demands. Persuaded? Her smile was sharp, showing the barest hint of elongated canines. I can be very persuasive when I choose to be, Inquisitor. There are advantages to inspiring fear, even if I deplore the necessity. They had returned to the main hall, and Elena gestured toward 2 chairs before the fire. Matthias hesitated, then sat. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that he was being deceived by a creature of supernatural cunning. But his mind, trained by years of theological study, honed by the rigorous logic of the Inquisition, could not find the flaw in what he had seen. Why? He asked finally. If you are what you claim, a predator by nature, why would you choose to help humans? What do you gain? Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost too low to hear. I have lived for over 400 years, Brother Matthias. In that time I have been many things: daughter, wife, mother, widow, monster, saint, killer, healer. I have fed on the blood of the innocent, and I have spent decades atoning for those sins. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched the world change in ways both glorious and terrible. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that took his breath away. Humanity. Raw, aching, genuine humanity. I help them because I remember what it was to be human, because some part of me, perhaps the best part, refuses to surrender to the darkness that my nature demands. Because in their lives, in their small joys and simple hopes, I find an echo of what I once was. And because, in the end, what else is there? If I do not spend these endless years in service to something greater than my own survival, then what meaning does my existence have? I would be nothing but a monster, and I have been that before. I will not be it again. Matthias found himself unable to speak. Everything in his training told him this was deception, that demons were the fathers of lies, that no creature of darkness could possess such depth of feeling or clarity of purpose. And yet he could not deny the evidence of his own observations. The healthy village, the grateful people, the careful work of healing and protection. Your church would call this impossible, Elena said softly. They would say that evil cannot choose good, that a vampire must feed on human blood, that redemption is not available to creatures such as I, and perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am deceiving myself, and this path I walk is merely another form of damnation. But I must try, Brother Matthias, even if I fail, even if, in the end, I am destroyed for the crime of hoping for salvation. I must try. The Church teaches that God's mercy is infinite, Matthias heard himself say, that even the worst sinner can find redemption through true repentance. Does that extend to those who were never human to begin with? To those who carry the curse of their nature in their very blood? Eleanor shook her head. I have asked that question of priests before. They give me many answers, but never certainty. How can there be certainty in such uncharted theological waters? Father Andre had been silent throughout, but now he spoke. I believe, he said quietly, that God judges the heart, not the flesh. That intention and action matter more than the vessel that contains them. But I am a simple parish priest. What do I know of such mysteries? Matthias rose and walked to the window, looking out over the sleeping village. Lights glimmered in windows. Smoke rose peacefully from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, the sound comforting in its mundanity. He thought of the 17 creatures he had destroyed. Had any of them been like Elena? Had any possessed this same desperate grasp at meaning, at redemption? Or had they all been mindless killers, animated by nothing but hunger and malice? He did not know. And that ignorance suddenly seemed like a terrible weight. "What would you have me do?" he asked without turning. "I came here to destroy a vampire. The bishop expects a report. The Inquisition demands results." "Tell them the truth," Elena said. "Tell them you found a village at peace, protected by an unlikely guardian. Tell them that the vampire of Veleni is no threat to the faithful. And tell them that sometimes the world is more complex than our neat categories allow." "They will not believe me. They may even accuse me of falling under your enchantment." "Perhaps. But you are a man who values truth, I think. And the truth, uncomfortable as it may be, is that I am not your enemy." Matthias turned to face her. In the firelight, she looked almost mortal, the shadows hiding the subtle wrongness of her too perfect features, her too fluid movements. Almost, but not quite. She was other, foreign, a thing that should not exist according to every precept of natural philosophy and religious doctrine. And yet she existed, and she had chosen, against all reason, against her very nature, to be a force for good in this small corner of the world. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to think, to pray, to understand what I have seen here." "Take all the time you need," Elena replied. "I have nowhere else to be." The days that followed were among the strangest of Matthias's life. He remained in Veleni, ostensibly continuing his investigation, but in truth engaged in something far more complex. He observed. He questioned. He watched Elena move through the village, seeing how the people responded to her presence. Children ran to her without fear, showing her their treasures and their hurts. Adults consulted her on matters of health and farming. She moved among them like a benevolent spirit, never taking, always giving. And in the evenings, he returned to the manor to talk with her. They discussed theology and philosophy, history and medicine, the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. Elena was well read, her knowledge spanning centuries of scholarship. She could quote Augustine and Aquinas, but also Aristotle and Plato. She had known Muslims and Jews, Buddhists and pagans, and from each tradition had drawn wisdom. "I have had time to learn," she said with a wry smile when he commented on her education. 4 centuries provides ample opportunity for reading. "And for forgetting," he countered. "Human memory is fallible. How do you retain so much?" "Vampire memory is different. Better in some ways, worse in others. I remember everything, Brother Matthias, every face of every person I have fed upon, every scream, every moment of terror. That is my curse. Perfect recollection of every sin I have committed. The weight of it would drive a mortal mind to madness. Some nights, I think it has driven me mad as well. Yet you continue." "Yet I continue." She stared into the fire, her expression distant. "What choice do I have? To surrender to despair would be to dishonor all those I have harmed. The least I can do, the only thing I can do, is ensure their suffering had meaning, that it taught me to be better." One night, as a storm raged outside and the wind howled around the old stones of the manor, Matthias asked the question that had been haunting him since that first evening. "Do you ever wish you could die?" that you could end this burden of existence? Eleanor was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the storm. Every day, every single day for the last 200 years. But wishing is not the same as acting. There are ways for my kind to end our existence, if we truly choose it. Walk into the sun. Starve ourselves past the point of regeneration. There are methods, but I have not taken them. Why not? Because I am a coward, perhaps. Or because I still hope, however foolishly, that my existence might mean something. That I might do enough good to balance, even slightly, the evil I have done. She turned to look at him, and in the lightning flash from outside, her eyes gleamed with unshed tears. Do you believe in redemption, Brother Matthias? True redemption, not just for the venial sins of ordinary mortals, but for creatures like me? For monsters who have done monstrous things? It was the central question, the one around which all others orbited. Matthias had spent years studying doctrine, memorizing the works of the Church Fathers, learning the fine distinctions of theological argumentation. But none of it had prepared him for this moment, for the raw need in her voice, the desperate hope that someone might tell her that her centuries of penance had not been in vain. I believe, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, that God's mercy exceeds human understanding, that the very fact you ask the question, that you seek to be better than your nature demands, is itself a form of grace. Whether that is enough for salvation in the next world, I cannot say. I am not wise enough, not learned enough, to pronounce on such matters. But in this world, in this moment, I see a being who has chosen light over darkness, service over tyranny, compassion over cruelty. And that choice matters. Elena closed her eyes, and a single tear traced down her cheek. It was red, he noted with clinical detachment. Blood, not salt water. Even her tears were a reminder of what she was. Thank you, she whispered. You cannot know what it means to hear that from a man of faith. They sat in silence as the storm spent its fury against the mountains. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted in Matthias's heart. He had come to destroy a monster, but he had found a person instead. A person who happened to be a monster, certainly, but a person nonetheless, and that changed everything. The bishop's expected report became a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. Matthias drafted letter after letter, each one more unsatisfactory than the last. How could he explain what he had found here? How could he make the distant authorities understand that the vampire of Valeni was not a threat, but a guardian? They would think him mad, or corrupted, or both. In the end, it was Elena who provided the solution. Tell them I am destroyed, she said one evening. Tell them you found me and performed the necessary rites. Provide them with some token as proof. I can give you a vial of my blood, if that would suffice. It will be enough to satisfy their demands. You want me to lie? Matthias felt the words catch in his throat. To falsify a report to the Holy Inquisition? I want you to save lives, Brother Matthias. Mine, yes, but also those of the people of Valeni. If you report that I live, what do you think will happen? The Inquisition will send others, perhaps many others, men who lack your wisdom and your willingness to see beyond doctrine. The village will be put to the question for harboring a vampire. People will die. And in the end, I will be destroyed anyway, but not before much suffering has been inflicted. There must be another way. If there is, I cannot see it. Can you? He could not. That was the terrible truth of it. The machinery of the Inquisition, once set in motion, did not stop for nuance or complexity. It sought evil and destroyed it, and if innocents were caught in that destruction, well, that was unfortunate, but necessary. Better 100 innocents suffer than one guilty soul escape justice. Except Elena was both guilty and innocent. She had committed terrible crimes in her past, but she had also spent centuries atoning for them. She was monster and saint, damned and striving for salvation. She defied categorization, and that made her dangerous, not to the village, but to the certainty that institutions like the Inquisition required to function. "If I do this," Matthias said slowly, "if I falsify the report and claim you destroyed, I become complicit in your existence. Every person you harm in the future becomes, in part, my responsibility. I understand, and I give you my word, for whatever a vampire's word is worth, that I will harm no one, that I will continue as I have these past 6 years, protecting, healing, helping where I can. And if I ever feel myself slipping, if the hunger grows too strong or the darkness calls too loud, I will walk into the sun before I allow myself to become a killer again." "How can I trust that?" Elena smiled, sad and knowing. "You cannot. Not with certainty. Trust always requires a leap of faith, does it not? You must decide whether you believe me capable of keeping my word, whether you think me worthy of that trust. I cannot make that decision for you." Matthias spent a sleepless night in prayer, wrestling with the choice before him. On one side lay duty, obedience, the clear path of following orders and returning to Vienna with the report his superiors expected. On the other lay a more complex path, one that required him to trust his own judgment over institutional wisdom, to place faith in a creature that every teaching of his church declared irredeemable. By morning, he had made his choice. The report he sent to the bishop was a masterwork of careful truth and tactical omission. Yes, he had found the vampire. Yes, he had confronted it in its lair. Yes, it had been destroyed according to the proper rites. The vial of blood he included as evidence was genuine. Elena had provided it with a small, knowing smile. The descriptions of the destruction were suitably dramatic, drawing on his memories of previous encounters to create a narrative that would satisfy the bureaucratic requirements. Only the conclusion was false. But it was a falsehood in service of a greater truth, he told himself, a lie that protected life rather than destroyed it. Father André witnessed him seal the letter, his expression carefully neutral. "You know what you're doing?" the young priest asked. "No," Matthias admitted, "but I know what I'm not doing. I'm not condemning an innocent population for the crime of being helped by an unlikely savior. Whatever sins I commit in doing this, I'll answer for them in the next life." "We all will," Father André said quietly. "But I think, perhaps, that God will judge us more kindly than we fear." The letter was dispatched with a merchant heading west, and Matthias felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like chains. There was no taking it back now. He had crossed a line, had placed himself in opposition to the institution he had served for 20 years. If the truth ever came out, he would face charges of heresy, corruption, perhaps even collusion with demonic forces. But when he returned to the village and saw the children playing in the snow, heard the laughter from the tavern, watched smoke rise peacefully from chimneys, he felt something he had not experienced in years, certainty that he had done the right thing. Elena found him that evening, standing at the edge of the village, looking out over the valley below. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done. You're officially dead, destroyed by the hand of the Holy Inquisition. You can continue your work here without fear of further investigation." "And you?" What will you do now? It was a good question. Matthias had not thought beyond the immediate problem, had not considered what came next for him. Return to Vienna? Resume his duties, hunting genuine threats? The idea seemed suddenly hollow, the certainty that had guided his actions for 2 decades now thrown into doubt. I don't know, he said honestly. My faith has not wavered. I still believe in God, in the Church's essential mission. But I find I can no longer be certain that I understand that mission as clearly as I thought I did. The world, it seems, is more complex than my training prepared me for. Welcome to the burden of wisdom, Elena said with gentle irony. It's a heavy load to carry. The knowledge that right and wrong are not always clearly delineated, that sometimes the monstrous can be noble and the holy can be cruel. Most people never bear that weight. They live their entire lives in comfortable certainty. It would be easier to be certain. Easier, but less honest. She turned to face him, and in the failing light, she looked almost human. You gave me a great gift today, Brother Matthias. You chose to see me as I am, not as your doctrine told you I must be. That takes courage of a sort most people never exercise. Or foolishness. History will not judge me kindly if the truth emerges. Then we must ensure the truth remains hidden. She smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Stay, if you wish. The village could use a learned man. Father Andre is gifted, but he's young, and the people respect learning. You could teach, help guide them. Do good work here, where the Inquisition's eyes will not find you. It was tempting. The idea of a quiet life, of service without the weight of institutional authority, of days spent in honest labor rather than hunting shadows. But Matthias knew himself too well. He was not made for peace, not yet. There were too many questions churning in his mind, too many doubts that required resolution. I cannot stay, he said. Not now. Perhaps someday, when I have made sense of what has happened here. But for now, I must return to Vienna. I must face whatever consequences come from my actions, and I must decide what kind of man I wish to be going forward. I understand. Elena reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was cool, but not cold, strong, but gentle. Thank you, Brother Matthias, for seeing me, for trusting me, for choosing mercy over certainty. Those are rare gifts in this world. As is what you do here, he replied. Continue your work, Lady Elena, and if you ever have need of a friend, send word to me through Father Andre. I will come. I will remember that. They stood together in the gathering darkness, the vampire and the Inquisitor, two beings who should have been enemies united by a shared understanding that the world was far stranger and more nuanced than either of their traditions acknowledged. Above them, the first stars began to emerge, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of the creatures below. The next morning, Matthias prepared for departure. The villagers came to bid him farewell, pressing gifts upon him: bread, cheese, a fine wool scarf knitted by the old woman who had called Elena an angel. He accepted them with gratitude, touched by their kindness to a stranger who had come among them with suspicion and left with understanding. Father Andre walked with him to the edge of the village. What will you tell them in Vienna? The young priest asked. If they press you for details? The truth, as far as it goes. I found a vampire. I confronted it. It is no longer a threat. They need know nothing more than that. And if they send you on another such mission? What then? Matthias smiled, though there was little humor in it. Then I will proceed with more caution than I have shown in the past. I will remember that things are not always what they seem. that evil and good can wear unexpected faces, and I will trust my own judgment as much as my doctrine. That's a dangerous path for an Inquisitor to walk, perhaps, but it's the only one I can walk now with a clear conscience." They clasped hands, and Matthias mounted courage. The horse seemed eager to be moving, pawing at the snow with one hoof. But before he could ride away, Elena appeared, moving with that unnatural speed that still unsettled him despite all his time in her presence. "A moment more," she said, reaching up to hand him something wrapped in cloth. "A gift. Open it when you're alone." He tucked the package into his saddlebag and nodded his thanks. Then, with a final look back at the village of Veleni, at the improbable sanctuary it had become, he turned courage toward the mountain pass and began the long journey back to the world he had left behind. The wrapped package remained unopened until he stopped for the night at a wayside inn 3 days' travel from Veleni. In the privacy of his room, he unwrapped the cloth to find a small book, bound in worn leather with pages yellowed by age. Opening it, he found it was a journal, written in a neat hand in a mix of Latin and Old Church, Slavonic. The first entry was dated 1421. The last was from just days before his arrival in Veleni. It was Elena's story, set down in her own words, holding nothing back. The crimes she had committed, the people she had killed, the long, slow journey from monster to something approaching human, the failures and the small victories, the endless, grinding weight of guilt and the desperate hope for redemption. Matthias read through the night, unable to put it down. Here was truth, raw and unvarnished, a confession more complete than any he had ever heard in all his years of inquisitorial service. By the time the sun rose, he had reached the final entry, written the night before he had sent his false report. "If you are reading this, Brother Matthias, then you have already made your choice. You have seen fit to trust me, to believe that I might be more than the sum of my sins. I give you this record so that you may know exactly what manner of creature you have spared, so that if doubt ever plagues you, if you wonder whether you made the right choice, you can read these pages and see the full truth of who I am, monster and penitent both. Know that I will honor the promise I made to you. Know that I will guard these people as long as I draw breath. And know that whatever path you walk from here, you have my gratitude and my respect. In 400 years, I have met few men who possessed the courage to question their certainty. You are remarkable, Brother Matthias. Never doubt that. May God grant you peace wherever your journey leads. Elena?" Matthias closed the book and held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of the trust it represented. Then he carefully rewrapped it and placed it in the bottom of his pack, beneath his other possessions. It was evidence that could destroy them both, but it was also a testament to something that transcended the simple categories of good and evil his training had taught him to recognize. The journey back to Vienna took 3 weeks, and with each passing day, Matthias felt the weight of civilization settling back onto his shoulders. The deeper he traveled into the heart of the empire, the more the extraordinary events in Veleni seemed like a fever dream, something that could not possibly have occurred in the rational world of law and order and ecclesiastical authority. But the journal remained in his pack, a constant reminder that the world was larger and stranger than Vienna's marble halls acknowledged. His return was noted, but not celebrated. The bishop accepted his report with a nod of satisfaction, pleased that another threat had been neutralized, another victory won in the eternal struggle against darkness. Matthias was commended for his diligence and offered a new assignment: rumors of a werewolf in the Bohemian forests, terrorizing remote settlements. "I require time for prayer and contemplation, Your Excellency," Matthias said, the lie coming more easily than he had expected. The confrontation in Transylvania was spiritually taxing. I would ask for a few months to restore myself before undertaking another mission. The bishop frowned, but acquiesced. Very well. But do not tarry too long, Brother Matthias. The Lord's work does not wait upon our convenience. Of course, Your Excellency. He was given a small cell in the monastery attached to the cathedral, a space barely large enough for a bed and a writing desk. It suited him well. He spent his days in the library, poring over theological texts with new eyes, searching for answers to questions he had never thought to ask before. Could a creature born of darkness choose light? Was redemption available to all, or only to those deemed worthy by human judgment? Where did divine mercy end and human presumption begin? The scholars he consulted gave him the expected answers. Vampires were demonic entities, incapable of true virtue. Their apparent good deeds merely deceptions to lure the innocent to damnation. To suggest otherwise was to fall prey to the oldest trick of the devil, the appearance of good in service of ultimate evil. But Matthias had seen the truth of Valeni. He had witnessed genuine compassion, authentic sacrifice, real service. And he could not reconcile what he had seen with what he was told must be true. Winter gave way to spring, and still he remained in Vienna, unable to resolve the contradiction that gnawed at his faith. He performed his duties mechanically, attending Mass, hearing confessions, instructing novices in the methods of identifying supernatural threats. But his heart was not in it. Part of him remained in that mountain village, in those strange conversations with a creature who should not have been able to discourse on mercy and redemption. It was on a warm evening in May, as the city celebrated the feast day of St. John Nepomuk, that everything changed. Matthias was walking back to the monastery from the library when he noticed a commotion near one of the city gates. A crowd had gathered, and he could hear angry voices, accusations being hurled. Pushing through the press of bodies, he found a young woman being held by two city guards, while a merchant gestured angrily at her. She was foreign, clearly. Her clothing marked her as coming from the eastern provinces, and her face had the high cheekbones and dark eyes common among the Wallachian people. "Thief!" the merchant was shouting. "She stole from my stall! I demand justice!" "I took nothing," the woman said, her German heavily accented but clear. "I merely asked the price of the bread. He accuses me because I am a stranger." "Lies. I saw you with my own eyes." Matthias studied the scene with practiced assessment. The merchant was well-fed, prosperous, his clothing marking him as a man of means. The woman was thin, her dress worn and patched, her shoes split at the seams. She had the look of someone who had travelled far and hard, surviving on determination alone. "What is the dispute?" Matthias asked, his voice carrying the authority of his position. The crowd parted for him, recognizing the cassock of an Inquisitor. The merchant's anger shifted to obsequious respect. "Brother, thank the saints you are here. This foreign woman attempted to steal from my stall. She must be punished according to law." "And you? What do you say?" Matthias asked the woman directly. She met his gaze without flinching, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. Pride, defiance, and beneath it, carefully hidden, a flicker of fear. "I am travelling to find my sister, who works in a noble house here. I stopped to ask the price of bread, nothing more." This man saw an opportunity to cause trouble for a stranger. "She lies." "Peace." Matthias held up a hand, and the merchant fell silent. "You, merchant, what proof do you have that she stole from you?" "I saw her. Is that not proof enough?" "Did anyone else see this alleged theft?" The merchant looked around, suddenly uncertain. The crowd shuffled, but no one stepped forward to corroborate his story. Matthias waited, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Perhaps," he said finally, "there has been a misunderstanding. The woman is a traveller, unfamiliar with our ways. You are a prosperous merchant, secure in your position. Surely you can afford to show mercy to one who is lost and far from home." The merchant's face reddened, but he could not refuse a direct appeal from an inquisitor. Yes, brother. Of course. Christian charity demands no less." "Excellent. Then the matter is resolved." Matthias turned to the guards. "Release her." The guards looked uncertain, but they obeyed. The woman rubbed her wrists where they had gripped her, her expression wary. The crowd, sensing the drama was over, began to disperse. Matthias gestured for the woman to follow him, leading her away from the gate into a quieter street. When they were alone, he stopped and turned to face her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That merchant would have seen me beaten, or worse. What is your name?" "Ioana. Ioana Popescu." "And you truly came to Vienna to find your sister?" "Yes. She left our village 2 years ago to work in the household of Baron Rothstein. I have not heard from her in months, and I worry." She trailed off, and Matthias saw genuine concern in her face. "The Rothstein household is on the other side of the city. Come, I will take you there." "You are kind, brother. I did not expect such kindness from the church." Something in her tone made him look at her more sharply. "You have reason to mistrust the church?" Ioana hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I come from Valeni," she said quietly. "In Transylvania. Do you know it?" Matthias felt his heart begin to race. "I know it." "Then you know of the Lady of the Manor, of Elena Draculesti." She studied his face carefully. "Did you truly destroy her, as the stories say? Or did you? What do you know?" The question came out more sharply than he intended. "Only that you came to our village as an inquisitor, and that you left with kindness in your eyes, not victory, and that the lady still walks in the evening, still tends to the sick, still protects us." Ioana smiled slightly. "She sent me with a message for you, if I should find you. She said you would know me by my name. She told me to say that I am the old woman's granddaughter, the one who spun the wool for your scarf." Matthias reached up unconsciously to touch the scarf, which he still wore despite the warm weather. "Elena sent you?" "She worries about you. She says that doubt is a heavy burden, and she fears she has placed too great a weight upon your shoulders. She wanted you to know that the village thrives, that her work continues, that you made the right choice, whatever your conscience may tell you in dark moments." "How did she know I would be struggling?" Ioana's smile widened. "She has lived a very long time, Brother Matthias. She understands the human heart better than most humans do. She knew that a man of faith who breaks faith with his institution would carry that burden heavily." They reached the Rothstein mansion as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Matthias spoke with the steward, who confirmed that yes, a girl named Maria Popescu worked in the household, and yes, she would be overjoyed to see her sister. The reunion that followed was touching, tears and laughter mixing as the two women embraced. But before Ioana disappeared into the mansion's depths, she turned back to Matthias. "She also said to tell you that the offer remains open. If you ever wish to return to Valeni, to find peace in work that matters, there is a place for you there. She would welcome you, not as inquisitor, but as friend." Friend. The word echoed in Matthias's mind as he walked back through the darkening streets. When had he last had a friend? True friendship required equality, mutual respect, the sharing of burdens. His position as Inquisitor had always set him apart, made him object of fear or reverence, but never simple companionship. And Elena, the creature he should have destroyed, offered him friendship. That night, Matthias made his decision. He would return to Valeni, but not immediately. First, he would complete one more mission for the Inquisition, the werewolf in Bohemia. He would approach it as he had always approached such tasks, but with new eyes, looking for the complexity beneath the surface. And if he found not a mindless monster, but something more nuanced, he would act accordingly. The mission to Bohemia took him 2 months, and what he found there only reinforced the lessons of Valeni. The werewolf was indeed a man who transformed under the full moon, but he was no savage killer. He was a woodcutter named Carroll, who had been cursed through no fault of his own, and who locked himself in a cellar every month to prevent harm to others. The attacks had been on sheep, not humans, and even those had been accidents when his chains had failed. Matthias helped Carroll find a better solution, a reinforced chamber, blessed with prayers of protection, where he could safely weather his transformations. And in his report to the bishop, he wrote that the werewolf had been dealt with according to proper procedures. Another careful lie, another small betrayal of the institution he had sworn to serve. But each lie felt less like betrayal and more like truth. Truth to a higher principle than institutional authority. Truth to the complexity of creation, to the reality that good and evil were not always clearly labelled, that mercy was sometimes wiser than judgment. By autumn, Matthias knew he could not continue as he had been. He could not serve the Inquisition while carrying these doubts, could not in good conscience hunt creatures he might end up protecting. And so, in a private audience with the bishop, he requested release from his vows. "You wish to leave the order?" The bishop's shock was evident. "Brother Matthias, you are one of our most effective agents. Your record is exemplary. Why would you abandon this calling?" "I do not abandon the calling to serve God, Your Excellency. But I have come to believe that my service can be better rendered elsewhere, among the people, rather than hunting shadows. You speak in riddles. If there is some failing in your faith—" "My faith remains strong, but my certainty has been shaken, and I have learned that certainty can be as much a liability as an asset. I need time away from the rigors of the Inquisition to understand what God truly requires of me." The bishop was not pleased, but he could not deny a sincere request for release. The process took months. Interviews, evaluations, periods of enforced contemplation. But by the time winter returned, Matthias was free. No longer Brother Matthias of the Holy Inquisition, but simply Matthias, a layman with education and experience, but no institutional authority. The journey back to Valeni took him through familiar paths, but everything seemed different now. He was different. The weight of office had been lifted, and though he still carried the weight of his choices, it was a burden he bore willingly rather than one imposed upon him. Valeni looked much as it had when he left, though there were subtle changes, new repairs to the church, an addition to the inn, the signs of a prosperous, growing community. The villagers greeted him with surprise and pleasure, and Father André embraced him like a long-lost brother. "You came back," the young priest said, wonder in his voice. "She said you would, but I wasn't certain." "Neither was I, for a long time, but here I am." "She's at the manor. She knew you were coming. Don't ask me how. She just knew." Matthias walked the familiar path up the hill as evening fell. The door to the manor was open, light spilling out into the growing darkness. And there, silhouetted in the doorway, was Elena. "Welcome home, Matthias," she said, and the warmth in her voice made something in his chest tighten. "I'm not sure this is home yet," he replied, climbing the steps to stand before her. "But I think it might become one. Come in. We have much to discuss." They talked through the night, as they had during his first visit, but the conversation was different now. There was no suspicion, no careful testing of boundaries. Instead, they spoke as equals, as friends, sharing the events of the months they had been apart. Matthias told her of his decision to leave the Inquisition, of the crisis of faith and conscience that had driven him away from certainty and towards something more honest, if less comfortable. Elena listened with the intensity of someone who understood the weight of such choices. "You gave up everything," she said softly. "Your position, your purpose, your place in the world. That takes courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes I'm not sure which. Both, perhaps. The bravest choices often appear foolish to those who have never had to make them." She paused, then added, "What will you do now? You are welcome to stay here, to make Valeni your home. Father Andre could use assistance, and the village would benefit from your learning. But you are not obligated to remain. You have given me more than enough already." "I want to stay," Matthias said, surprised by how certain he felt. "I want to help here, to do work that matters in ways I can see and touch, to be part of a community rather than standing apart from it. But, but, I need to understand what this is, between us." He gestured to indicate the space that connected them, the strange bond that had formed over conversations and shared secrets. "You are not human, Elena. You are something other, something my training tells me is irredeemable. And yet I find myself drawn to you, not despite what you are, but including it. I need to know if that's wisdom or folly." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability he had not heard before. "I cannot tell you what you feel, Matthias. I can only tell you what I feel, and hope that you will not think me mad for saying it. I have lived for 400 years, and in all that time, I have never met anyone who saw me as you do. Not as monster to be feared, or curiosity to be studied, or tool to be used, but as person, complete and complex, worthy of consideration and respect despite my nature." She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. "I value your friendship more than I can express. The conversations we have shared, the understanding we have reached, these are treasures beyond price to one who has spent centuries alone. But I would not have you bound by obligation or gratitude. If you stay, it must be because you choose to, freely and without coercion." "What if I choose to stay because I find myself falling in love with a creature I was sent to destroy?" The words were out before Matthias could stop them, a confession pulled from somewhere deep in his soul. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stared at him, her expression shifting through surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. "You cannot," she whispered. "It would be madness. I am not human, Matthias. I will never age, never die save by violence. Any relationship between us would be doomed from the start." "All relationships are doomed from the start," Matthias countered. "All humans die, eventually. The only question is whether the joy of connection is worth the inevitable pain of loss. And I believe, that it is. I could hurt you. My nature. Your nature is to hunger for blood, yes, But you have mastered that hunger for 300 years. You have chosen compassion over cruelty, service over predation. I trust that choice. I trust you. You should not. Perhaps not. But I do. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the coolness of her skin, the strength in her fingers. I have spent my entire adult life in service to institutions that claimed absolute certainty about right and wrong, good and evil. That certainty led me to do things I am not proud of, and nearly led me to destroy something precious. I have learned, at great cost, that the world is more complex than I was taught, that sometimes monsters are more human than humans, and sometimes love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Elena's fingers tightened around his. If we do this, if we attempt this impossible thing, you must understand what you are accepting. I will outlive you by centuries. I will watch you age and die while I remain unchanged. That is a grief I have borne before. With humans I have cared for. It never becomes easier. Then we will have whatever time we have, Matthias said, and we will make it meaningful. Is that not all any mortal can hope for? You are remarkable, Elena said, and there were tears on her face, red as blood in the candlelight. Impossible, and remarkable, and utterly mad. But yes, if you truly wish this, I will try. I will try to love you as you deserve, even knowing it will end in pain. All worthwhile things do, Matthias replied, and then he was pulling her close, and she was letting him, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, he felt truly at peace. Their relationship unfolded slowly over the months that followed, built on foundations of mutual respect and hard-won understanding. Matthias took up residence in a cottage near the manor, working alongside Father André to serve the spiritual needs of Valeni, while also teaching the children to read and write. Elena continued her work of healing and protection, but now she had a partner who could move freely in daylight, who could represent her interests when she could not be present. They were careful to maintain propriety in public. The village knew of their friendship, but neither wished to scandalize the people who had come to trust them both. But in private, in the quiet evenings when the world narrowed to firelight and conversation, they built something unprecedented, a love that transcended the boundaries of human and other, mortal and immortal, hunted and hunter. It was not always easy. There were moments when Matthias still felt the pull of his old certainties, when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. And there were nights when Elena's hunger grew strong, when she locked herself away to avoid the temptation of the living blood that pulsed through Matthias's veins. But they persisted, because the alternative, returning to their separate lonelinesses, had become unthinkable. 2 years after Matthias first arrived in Valeni as an Inquisitor, the village held a celebration. It was ostensibly to mark the completion of repairs to the church, but in truth, it was a celebration of community, of survival, of the strange and wonderful thing they had built together. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter echoing off the mountains. Matthias and Elena watched from the steps of the church, standing close but not touching, respecting the boundaries of public propriety. But their eyes met often, speaking in the silent language of those who know each other deeply. "Are you happy?" Elena asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible," Matthias replied honestly. "I thought happiness required certainty, solid ground beneath one's feet. But I have found something better. Joy in the midst of uncertainty, peace in accepting complexity, love that exists despite all reason. We are an unlikely pair. The best ones usually are." He smiled at her, and she smiled back, And in that moment, the years between them, his few decades and her centuries, seemed to collapse into insignificance. "What do you think will happen when you die?" Eleanor asked, and though her voice was calm, he heard the pain beneath it. "Where will you go? Will your God accept a soul that loved a vampire?" "I don't know," Matthias admitted. "I have studied theology all my life, and I find I know less with each passing year rather than more. But I believe, I hope, that God judges the heart. That love, genuine love that makes us better than we were, is never a sin. And if I am wrong, if I am damned for loving you, then I will face that damnation knowing I chose authenticity over dogma. I wish I had your faith. You have something just as valuable: hope. The hope that redemption is possible, that centuries of good can balance years of evil, that who we choose to be matters more than what we were born as. That is its own form of faith." The celebration continued around them, life persisting and flourishing in this small corner of the world. And above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient courses, indifferent and eternal, while two impossible beings found brief warmth in each other's presence. Years would pass. Matthias would age while Eleanor remained unchanged, a fact that caused him no distress and her considerable pain. They would face challenges, suspicions from travelling authorities, the occasional investigation they had to carefully deflect. But they would face them together, the former Inquisitor and the vampire he had been sent to destroy, building a life that defied all conventional wisdom. And when, decades later, Matthias finally lay on his deathbed with Elena holding his hand, he would have no regrets. He had lived honestly, loved deeply, and served faithfully. Not the institution, but the higher principles that institution had sometimes forgotten in its zeal for certainty. "Thank you," Elena whispered as his breathing grew shallow. "Thank you for seeing me, for trusting me, for loving me despite everything." "It was easy," Matthias managed, his voice barely audible. "You made it easy." And with those words, with her cool hand in his, he slipped away. Elena sat with him through the night, keeping vigil as she had kept vigil over so many others across her long existence. But this grief was different, sharper, more profound than any she had known before, because Matthias had not just seen her, he had known her, and in knowing her, had given her something she had thought lost forever: the possibility of genuine human connection. She would continue her work in Veleni for decades more, watching over the descendants of those first villagers she had saved, protecting and healing and serving. And every evening, as the sun set and she rose to face another night, she would think of the Inquisitor who had come to destroy her, and instead taught her that love was the greatest form of redemption. In a small cemetery beside the church, Matthias's grave bore a simple inscription: "He sought truth and found love. May he rest in the peace he brought to others." And sometimes, in the quiet moments when no one else was around, Elena would stand before that stone and speak to the man whose mortal life had been so brief, but whose impact had been eternal. "You changed me," she would say. "You showed me that even after 4 centuries, I could still learn, still grow, still become more than I was. That is a gift beyond price." The wind would whisper through the graveyard, and though there was no answer, Elena felt certain that somehow, somewhere, Matthias heard her and approved.